As I've been on my journey to becoming a secure creditor, which is a type of sovereign, I kept hearing about two sets of laws, that being maritime law and natural law. Natural law is also nicknamed the unwritten law, which isn't that helpful when you're trying to figure out what it is. And when I was trying to figure out what natural law was, I started listening to IamSomeDude.com, and he stated that if you want to know what natural law is, just plant a garden. And at first I didn't know what he was talking about. What does a garden have to do with American law, and why would our founding fathers write it into the Declaration of Independence as our highest form of law in the nation? As I started thinking about it, I slowly began to understand what he was talking about. I then started viewing the world in a slightly different way, comparing our current way of living to that of what I see in nature. In nature, our purest form of being is tribal mammals. And in this video, I will talk about natural law as it relates to American and Western home markets. I observe nature on a daily basis as I'm in my home garden every day and go hiking regularly as well. In my backyard, we have a family of squirrels who live in the olive trees. They get their food from our pecan tree and water from the stream across the street. The only time these squirrels would lose their home is if A, another group of squirrels moves in and pushes them out, or B, an act of nature, like the tree dies. The same can be said for every animal on Earth. I then compared the model of animals to the model of human tribes living under natural law. Building a home is a tradition that is passed from one generation to the next. Homes are shelter for survival, and people only use the resources which were immediately surrounding them to build their homes. Moreover, both the land and the resources found on it were free. All it took was the time and labor for one to harvest the resources and construct whatever they needed to. They may have also traded with other tribes to get materials that aren't regularly available in their area, but in general, they just use what's around. Once the home is built, the only way the tribe would lose it is through an act of war or through an act of nature. In the tribal model, although not everyone is doing the same job, all responsibilities, benefits, and hardships are more or less equally shared. Everyone contributes to the prosperity of the whole, and everyone has a home and place within the tribe. Comparing the tribal model to our current model, it is still very similar. Most people have a place within the system. However, not all hardships and benefits are distributed equally. As an imaginative example, I overlaid our current way of life on top of that of the tribal model. Let's say that the chief of tribe A tells his men to stop hunting and building homes, and he tells the women to stop making clothes and gardening. Instead, the chief instructs them to enslave a second tribe of people, and this slave class of tribe B will supply and construct all of the things for tribe A. In the meantime, tribe A will be the CEOs and managers ruling over tribe B. As long as everyone in tribe A actively works in those positions, then everyone in tribe A will reap the profits being produced by tribe B. However, there's one catch. The chief has only provided enough CEO and managerial positions for 20% of his tribe, leaving the bottom 80% without a job. In order for the bottom 80% of tribe A to have access to the resources being provided by the slaves of tribe B, since that is their only way of surviving now, they must voluntarily serve the top 20% of their own people in tribe A. So what do I mean when I say that they must serve the top 20%? Relating it back to our current way of being, the majority of people nowadays are working jobs that are service-based. Because manufacturing jobs such as making furniture, pottery, clothing, farming, car manufacturing, and basically everything that's hands-on has been outsourced overseas to countries where people are being used as slave labor, the majority of the jobs left in America and other Western countries are now service-based. There are two types of service-based industries. There's the government public side and then the private side. Your government service jobs are teaching, police, firemen, the IRS, now doctors, positions like that. And on the private side, we have our waiters, lawyers, building security, salesmen, and the like. We also have the entertainment and arts industries. However, only a small percentage of people have been able to successfully navigate those industries for a long period of time, for reasons I will get to in another video. Now that the majority of positions available are service-based, this leaves a great majority of people vulnerable to the ups and downs of corporate games. Every time there's a recession, there are less private service jobs available. Less people can afford to go out to eat, therefore there are layoffs in restaurants, which means even less people have money. So there's even less people spending money at restaurants, and there are even more layoffs, and so on. As more people fall into poverty, more people must rely on welfare and government assistance, which means more people will be hired as government workers, which will ultimately mean a raise in taxes, which will put more financial strain and pressure on the few people who have managed to keep their jobs. This is a long tangent, but my point was, in the process of trying to be materially wealthy by shrugging off our personal responsibilities of growing our own food, creating our own clothes and shelter, etc., we have boxed ourselves out of, the majority of us have boxed ourselves out of prosperity and independence that we were searching for in the first place. Now that we have incorporated a slavery-based model, we are more poor, inept, and physically and mentally unwell now more than ever. The people of the West, at least from my worldview, living in Los Angeles, we don't have any more life skills, nor is there enough room in the system for everybody to prosper. This is the exact opposite of our tribal model, where everyone had life skills, and so long as everyone worked together in harmony with the earth, everyone could prosper. Unless they were kicked out of the tribe, but that's a different story. Nowadays, it's not about the survival of family and communities. It's about the survival of corporations. My entire life, everybody has been telling me that we need business and corporations in order to survive, but I question that logic. We need people in order to survive. A corporation is nothing more but a platform which facilitates peaceful negotiations for trade. McDonald's doesn't supply you with hamburgers. The cow gives its life to the farmer, who gives his cow to the butcher, who gives their meat to the buyer, who has a chef prepare the food and gives it to you. McDonald's is just a name. It didn't supply anything. It was people, the cow, and the earth who supplied everything to us. This simple interaction has nothing to do with government, corporations, or fancy economic algorithms. It's just human nature. Connectivity, and creativity. I attend a local Shambhala meditation center, which is basically the cousin of Buddhism. And about 500 feet away from the center is a tiny pocket of homeless people living in tents under the freeway overpass. I see that about half of them still have their own cars, and many of them also have smartphones. This lets me know that these people are still working, yet they don't have a home. And looking at them reminded me of a statistic I heard a few years ago saying that there are more empty homes than there are homeless people living in America. If a percentage of homeless people still have jobs and are thus contributing to our country's success and prosperity, then why are they homeless? One popular theory I hear is that there's not enough land space or resources for everyone to have a home. So I thought about this. I grew up in an upper middle class suburb just outside of Los Angeles. There is a new McMansion being built on almost every other street, and sometimes there are multiple new homes being built on the same block. People are moving in, knocking down the old homes, oftentimes not even reusing any of the materials, and then they build these massive 3-story homes with marble, granite, brick, installing swimming pools, and all of these new things. My question is, if there aren't enough resources for everyone to have shelter, then how is it that these people can seem to have enough resources to create mini palaces in the desert? Either there are resources or there aren't. If there are no more resources, then there shouldn't be any new homes being built, especially not the size and quantity that are being built. On top of all of this, I always see these DIY home projects being promoted in TV shows and magazines, and I see the general population consume these products as well. Every time I walk into Lowe's or Osh or the like, it's always brand new something waiting for you. And we even have seasons. This year orange is in, next year floral print is in. There's always these new trends being made up, pushed out, and consumed by the public. And the majority of what I see are people throwing things out just because it's not the trend of the year. And I will admit that I am a hypocrite as well. I am not exempt from being a fat American pig, but I bring up this point to punch a hole in the not enough resources for everyone argument. Are there not enough resources, or do we not allocate them appropriately? One person is homeless living under a freeway so that another person can live in a 3-story home with marble countertops. I'm not saying that the second person doesn't deserve a nice home. I just question the morality of a smaller group of people living in overabundance while a larger group of people live in squalor. Under natural law, whomever builds the home or creates an item gets to keep it. The birds in my backyard build their nests with things they find, such as twigs, cloth, and other found objects. Once the nest is built, the bird who built it then lives in it. Or a bird will find a nest that was already built. If it's abandoned and nothing is protecting it, then the bird will move into that. And this is the same for humans. Depending on where one lives, their homes are built from neighboring trees or clay. Each home was built to suit the individual needs of the inhabitants based upon what is available by the earth or through trade. But of course, not everyone in the tribe has the same job. However, that doesn't mean that not everyone works just as hard. If imagining how Native Americans lived, all their teepees were essentially the same, whether one person was a hunter or the other person was a clothing maker. But looking at our present model, it would be like elevating the hunter above all else. The tribe gives extra resources to the hunter, while other members must make do with less. When the hunter and chief send the clothing maker's job to the slave tribe, now the clothing maker has lost their ability to contribute to the tribe. Now that they have less value to the tribe, the chief and/or hunter also require the former clothing maker to pay for land and rent their teepee, things which were considered free before this. They tried to adapt, offering to clean the hunter's teepee, but the hunter says he already has a cleaner and can't employ everyone. So the clothing maker went from holding an important role within the tribe to being the servant to having no place at all. And now that they aren't contributing anymore, they aren't allowed to have a teepee or access to any resources whatsoever. In the tribal model, homes are created as needed and with available local resources. If they wanted something that couldn't be found in their region, that's when trade and business entered the picture. However, people predominantly lived off of their own land and not the lands of other people. In the tribal model, everyone had a roof over their heads because everyone is essentially one giant family who helped each other survive. So going back to my fantasy example of tribes, let's say that the bottom 80% of the tribe, who were the servants, got tired of working hard for not much in return, and they decide to break off to an unoccupied patch of earth and start their own tribe. But the chief has now claimed to own all the land, including the land that neither he nor his tribe are occupying. He tells the ex-tribesmen that they cannot build a new community on the unoccupied land, and if they try, the chief will send his soldiers to destroy it and take everything they've created for themselves. Now the bottom 80% are left homeless and hungry once again. I asked myself if this behavior can be found in nature as well. And equating this to the squirrels in my backyard, let's say that a small group of squirrels are bogarting all the pecans and not sharing with the other squirrels, or letting the other squirrels live in the nests, which they helped to build. The bottom half of the squirrel community decides to leave the olive tree and live in the vacant oak tree where they can eat from a peach tree instead. But the olive squirrels were angered by this, even though they've never been to the oak tree, nor do they need the peaches. Now this minority group of olive squirrels have laid claim to all the trees in the neighborhood, even though they only occupy the 2 olive trees in my backyard. And they will fight any squirrel who has the audacity to live peacefully in their own trees and not pay homage to the tyrannical olive squirrels. This scenario sounds ridiculous because it is. And it's also what we as civilized, higher-minded mammals do to each other. Our explosion in homelessness is not due to an act of war, at least not in America, nor is it due to an act of nature, nor because of a lack of resources, as I illustrated earlier. People are losing their homes because of our current economic, banking, and legal practices, which concentrates the majority of the world's wealth into the hands of a small minority group of people. I have never seen a homeless community that I was impressed by. Every single one is dirty, people living in tents or under tarps, or sometimes just a mattress on the side of the road. People are living in conditions that I feel not even cavemen lived in. I find it odd that the human mind is capable of so much, yet these people are living in cardboard boxes like they're completely inept. I then compared our homeless population to the tribal model. First and foremost, virtually nobody has any life skills anymore. The majority of us, myself included, can't sew clothing, grow food consistently, hunt, build homes, chop wood, or do anything useful at all. But that doesn't matter because even if we did retain those skills, we're not permitted to use them. First of all, you need land for all of those things, which the homeless can't afford even when the land is vacant. The land which was once freely given to us by our Creator, or if you're atheist, then freely given to us by the cosmos' most epic design, now has a price tag so high many can't afford it. Imagine that. Our bodies are now considered unworthy of occupying space upon the earth from which our bodies originated in the first place. Even when the homeless do find leftover spaces, and even if they did retain life skills to build a proper shelter, the city won't permit them to build their homes there because those leftover spaces aren't zoned for residences. And even if they were allowed to build a home, the homeless aren't allowed to chop down the trees in that area because those trees are owned by the city and government. The homeless also aren't allowed to hunt, nor are they allowed to farm, since the majority of places aren't governmentally zoned for agriculture. Our chief has claimed every square inch of land, preventing anybody from succeeding without him, even if they could. To be homeless is to be exiled without ever leaving the country. You're not allowed to live in or contribute to the community, nor are you allowed to successfully function outside of it. Under natural law, if you could make an empty patch of land work for you, then it's yours. Under man's Roman and civil laws, this is not the case. Humans have gone from taking care of each other to taking care of corporations, and therefore the minority group of people who own the corporations. Homes aren't built as shelter to protect oneself, family, and community from the elements and predators. Homes are built as a way of making money. I used to work as a Lyft driver, and one of my fares told me that Chinese businessmen would purchase properties throughout Los Angeles, keep them for a while, and then sell them at a higher cost. These individuals never live in the home or the country at all. Yet Los Angeles has enough homeless people to populate a small city. And even those who aren't homeless are renting those apartments and have roommates. The very people who were born onto the land and tend to it are the very people who cannot afford to shelter their bodies upon that very same land. This is when I hear my uncle say that we need business and corporations in order to survive. But do we really? We have a minority group of people owning multiple homes throughout the world, while other people are renting or homeless altogether. Once a home is built, that's it, aside from maintenance. For example, my grandfather purchased our home for $5,000 nearly 90 years ago. Today, our home is worth close to $2 million. Why is that? It's not because we have $2 million in materials and resources in the home. With all the repairs throughout the years, the home is most likely worth closer to $30,000 maximum. Our home is worth that much because that's the fairy tale price that supply and demand has inflated it to. But there is a hidden danger with this price jump. If somebody wants to purchase our home, they would need to have $2 million, which equates to $2 million in resources that must be harvested and sold needlessly. As an example, let's say that my house took 5 trees in order to build it. 90 years later, I am now asking the buyer for 2,000 trees in order to pay for a home which only took 5 trees to build. And at least in my neighborhood, even after the buyer pays me 2,000 trees, The buyer will then knock down my home and spend an additional, 500 trees to build their dream home. The buyer agrees because they hope that in another 90 years they can then sell this 5-tree home for 20,000 trees. I give this as an example because I want to illustrate how many resources are required to pay for inflation and inflation only. It is not the cost of the house. At the end of the day, my house only took 5 trees to build. When we start inflating sticker prices, we must in turn harvest that much more from the earth. Now imagine everybody adopting this behavior for multiple generations. It doesn't matter what individuals think they can afford. What matters is what the earth can afford, and that's what's left out of our supply and demand equation. By one individual taking 2,000 trees needlessly, that leaves hundreds of individuals and animals without anything at all. Now, there are several points I didn't really touch on. The first one being I have not touched on our banking and economic system. I have not touched on the loaning debacle that everyone is finding themselves in, and I'm leaving that out of this video because I want to make an entirely separate video about economics using myself as an example. So that will be another video. But another point I haven't touched on is the more human reason for why many people are homeless. I do feel that everyone has a role to play in the state of their own lives. Many homeless people are drug addicts or mentally unwell, and that will be another story as well. The issues that we are facing today are systemic just as much as they are individual. And although seemingly indirect, the extreme wealth of one is the main reason and cause for the extreme poverty of another. The earth is a finite organism, but our economic and corporate models create an infinite lust for consumption. I think everybody knows this already, but the way we have been governing ourselves for the past 6,000 years needs to come to an end. Well, either it comes to an end or we and life on earth come to an end. Your choice. I won't be pushy. But there's a speaker I like to listen to named Mark Passio, and he said to never talk about a problem without also giving its solution. I am hesitant to share my thoughts about solutions because 9.9 times out of 10, nobody likes what I have to say. What is my solution for the home market? Well, the home market is directly related to our economic system. Our economic system is based in fiat currency, which means based in money of account, which is numbers on a ledger and does not reflect anything of tangible value. So if you would like to fix the economy, you must first base your economy in something of tangible value, or at least slowly work your way towards closing the gap. Even if you can't get to 100%, you can get closer than zero, which is where we are right now. By correcting our economic system, I do feel that everything else will self-adjust and the chips will fall wherever they may. And then at that point, we can start anew, where people actually and genuinely have a fair chance at success, so long as the patch of earth they're living on is fertile and can produce, and so long as the inhabitants of that patch of land take care of it. And in addition, if I continue to get my way, I would stop outsourcing our jobs to slaves in other countries. The only time you should be purchasing something from another country is when you can't find it in your own. You should not rely on the land and labor of some stranger in a faraway, distant land you've never been to. You should rely on your neighbor, because your neighbor needs you just as much as you need them. There are nets around the manufacturing buildings in China because so many Chinese workers are committing suicide by jumping off the roofs because they don't want to work in a factory anymore, and they don't want to share a studio apartment with 12 other people anymore, just so that we can have our trendy sweater for one season and then we throw it away. I want to free those people just as much as I want to free myself and free the people in the West who the majority of whom don't even know are trapped. I am not a violent person. I am not a vengeful person. I do not feel that I am a crazy person. But what I deem to be logical tends to be threatening to people who like to cling on to the status quo. At the beginning of this video, I mentioned that I am in the process of filing for sovereignty. Everybody always asks me why, and I'll probably make a separate video with more detail about that, but in a nutshell, why am I becoming sovereign? Because I am firing these people. And when I tell this to people, they tend to accuse me of hating of hating America, and I laugh because America protects people like me. America was founded by people like me. Under natural law, just as a squirrel governs itself, humans have the capacity to govern themselves, and that is protected. That is the founding principles of this country, of America. I am not upset that natural law is our highest form of law. I appreciate that because that set of laws is what is protecting my rights as a sovereign individual. The structure that is currently in place, for reasons that I will get to in another video, has deviated from our original set of laws. That deviation is contractual, which means when I become sovereign, I legally and lawfully end the contract with the federal government, thus putting me back under natural law, which is where I ultimately want to be. The next thing that people will say is that it is a completely lawless society where anybody is allowed to murder anybody. I laugh again because, once again, that is not the law. Going back to the Declaration of Independence, they say life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. I assume we know what life is, and I assume we know what pursuit of happiness is. But not a lot of people know what liberty is. And I learned what liberty was from another YouTuber named Chris Ann Hall. And she said that, and not just her, others, but they say that liberty just means you are free to do whatever you want so long as you do not infringe upon or hurt the life or property of another. So, for example, if I want to jaywalk on an empty road, I am free to do so. I am not hurting anybody by jaywalking. And under our original laws, you would not have received a ticket for that. However, still under the original laws, if I went up to somebody and punched them in the throat, that would be hurting that person. That act is illegal. You are still protected and you still have laws. And I am not saying to fire the government for everybody. If you want to be taken care of by somebody else, that is your free will choice. And I respect that, and I will not encroach upon that. But at the end of the day, the way our system is set up, being involved with the federal government is actually on a contractual basis. And as an individual, I have decided that I personally do not want to contract with the federal government. Just because I remove myself doesn't mean I am removing you and everybody else. I am simply removing myself, which is why I have decided to become sovereign. That was very long-winded, but to recap, the people of today are homeless, not because of an act of war or an act of nature. People today are homeless or renting because of our current economic system, which is sanctioned and backed by our federal government, which we are contracting with. In my opinion, if you would like to see some real change, we must get off of the fiat currency model as much as possible and onto something tangible. And in doing that simple act, I do feel we will naturally shift from purchasing our products from communist and socialist slave countries, and we will convert to purchasing from our local artisans. And at least in my life, sovereignty comes into play because it will force that result much sooner. So, thank you for entertaining my random thoughts and observations, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day or night.